But onwards with the actual video now, this 900 chapter question mark of a man is something that is commonly speculated amongst the fanbase. Because despite the distinct lack of dragon related content in the series, what we do have of him drops in some pretty powerful hints of the capabilities of this man. So I'm going to go through these events and then we're going to attempt to determine what kind of Devil Fruit user Dragon is, or even if he is a Devil Fruit user at all. So stepping into Dragon's very first appearance in good old chapter 100, here Dragon famously stops Smoker from capturing the boy who we now know is Dragon's son, but there's a wide variety of strange weather phenomena that seems to conveniently accompany Dragon's presence here. But this event is very strange because it actually differs quite greatly between the anime and manga versions. And not only that, but there's even a mistake in the official English translation that can make things even more confusing than they need to be. So starting with the manga, Dragon stops Smoker and says, "The world is waiting for our answer." And then we cut to this panel of like this huge gust of wind with Dragon seemingly saying "wind blast" to accompany it, which taken at face value seems like a fairly generic attack name. However, this was later recognized as a mistake, with the original Japanese line being Topo de A, which more accurately translates into shouting something like "a squall?" ? And in retrospect, it was almost certainly said by a random marine or perhaps even Smoker rather than Dragon. So this is kind of a tricky thing because this mistake does, for better or worse, heavily imply that Dragon is the individual controlling this wind, which could still very much be the case, and we'll add some evidence to that later, but this particular instance is an error. Meanwhile, the anime actually cut this line entirely. Dragon says the world is waiting for our answer, and then the wind just kicks in without someone yelling about it, which you would think might make the situation more ambiguous, but the anime also did something very interesting to say the least, which is how it would depict this force of wind. Essentially, the sky turned a very interesting shade of emerald green, and we proceeded to see this super stylized gust of wind, which looked to be very non-natural wind. And the whole scene retains this greenish tinge to it, which can be taken as a tangible cue connecting it to Dragon because green is heavily associated with this man being his primary color scheme and all. But fascinatingly enough, this wind also proceeds to ravage the entirety of Logtown, which I will emphasize did not happen in the manga. In the manga, it was just one short, sharp gust around Luffy's general area, and it's hard to know how to reconcile that. On the one hand, this could have been the anime staff having special knowledge, which they have certainly shown in the past, or it could have been the staff taking some creative license and greatly expanding this scene for some filler material. At this stage, the only thing that's undeniable is that this sudden shift of weather occurred coinciding with Dragon's physical presence. And on its own, that would be far too speculative for my liking. However, in chapter 587, we would see another such phenomenon. And this was during the post-war arc, specifically in the time of Luffy's flashback. Basically, the nobility of the Goa Kingdom, being the pricks they are, set the Grey Terminal on fire in an attempt to murder all of its lower class riffraff, when suddenly a gust of wind opens up a path straight to Dragon and his cohort of revolutionary forces. And I think this removes any sense of ambiguity I once had, because just as the original case of chapter 100 in the manga, this is a very controlled blast of wind, and the anime doesn't add any strange stylization this time around. And so while one instance is a coincidence, two instances becomes a pattern, and we can very comfortably tie the idea to wind and or weather control to either the presence of Dragon or the revolutionaries in general. And just to really hammer home this point about wind, in other appearances, wind is also a very emphasized element surrounding Dragon, such as during the Return to Water 7 arc where we see him staring out into the wind on Baltigo, or Ivankov's short flashback claiming that Dragon has a habit of staring out through the wind in the direction of East Blue, which is obviously where Luffy would have been at the time. So Dragon is pretty intrinsically linked to wind in particular, being a primary feature in most of his appearances throughout One Piece, which would obviously lead into our first general area of Devil Fruit speculation, which would be the Logia realm. Now this idea has existed ever since I became a fan of One Piece, all those centuries and centuries ago, and it almost certainly existed before that. But a common thought is that Dragon is the wielder of a wind-based Logia fruit. This is a natural assumption because wind fits quite nicely into the elemental theming of Logias. And while we do have some basic stuff like fire and ice elemental fruits, the Logia class also dives pretty deeply into more abstract features of nature, such as light and darkness. So I personally see no reason why wind could be excluded as a possibility within the Logia class. The only thing it doesn't do, which I should stress it doesn't necessarily need to, is explain some of the other weather phenomena during the Logtown arc. Controlling wind is one thing, but we also had a ton of other stuff involving storms and lightning, especially the lightning strike that saved Luffy from being executed by one Buggy. However, this could all very much be simple fate at work. Throughout the entirety of One Piece, storms have been used for very fateful encounters, like the Ed War, where the Roger pirates were saved from Shiki's armada by a fateful storm that destroyed his forces. So I don't necessarily think that we have to connect Dragon to the Greater Storm, although it would be cleaner, and I suppose there's always going to be an idea like, say, his control over wind is so great that he blew over some storm clouds from the Grand Line all the way to Logtown, or something along those lines. But a Logia is not the only solid possibility, and there are some great arguments to be made with the Zoan class as well. I'd say specifically within the mythical Zoan subclass, that is, because there happens to be a whole ton of options available, especially when it comes to the world of godlike figures. Because remember, if Sengoku can become a literal big Buddha, then this sort of stuff is well and truly in play for One Piece, meaning that Dragon could quite easily be, say, a mythical Zoan model Zeus, or a similar god that was fabled to be able to control weather and all of that good stuff. Actually, you know what? Even better than Zeus, much better, actually. Let's go for Fujin, who is a literal Japanese wind demon treated similarly to a god, and his counterpart Raijin would be another potential choice, whose powers comprise thunder, lightning, and storms, which would wrap everything up in a neat little package. Although given how strongly Dragon seems to be linked to wind, if I had to bet I would say the former, and furthermore the fact that both Fujin and Raijin are demons would link in pretty well with Dragon's position as a member of the D clan, being the natural enemy of the world nobles, in the same way that demons would be the natural enemy of the gods. And one other name to throw into the mythical Zoan mix might also be Susanoo, the Japanese god of storms and sea being particularly relevant in the world of One Piece. And I could probably go on forever listing mythical figures who have been linked to having the power of wind or storms, so let's just end that particular exploration by saying that the realm of Zoans is wide open for Dragon to fit rather comfortably into. But another thought that's often brought up though is that Dragon would be a literal dragon Zoan fruit, which is an idea that I'm personally not wildly keen on. It's just a bit too on the nose given that his name is literally Dragon, and right now we're exploring that whole idea of dragons with the Wano arcs. Kaido could very much be a dragon Zoan fruit user, albeit an Eastern dragon, although that still has very much yet to be confirmed. But we also have Momonosuke, whose artificial devil fruit was clearly based on an Eastern dragon, heavily resembling Kaido. So I guess there's room for Dragon to be another type of dragon, but really after Wano I'm hoping that we're kind of done with dragons. Not that my hopes have any bearing on the series whatsoever though, which is why I do mention it here out of sheer obligation. But let's also briefly touch on the Paramecia class now though, and I feel like we can dismiss this pretty easily. Logias and Zoans both make a decent degree of sense, but you would really have to stretch your thinking to make a decent case for a Paramecia. These fruits tend to have very isolated effects when not awakened, that is, and are mainly focused on bodily augmentation. And even when they're not like Foxy's Nora Noranami, they still have a comparatively small area of effect. But it's just so unlikely that with everything we've seen, Dragon could be lumped into the Paramecia realm, and I can't even think of a decent way in which I could argue it, even if I was to take for granted that he was an awakened user. So if you can, please do say so in the comments below, because I would be quite interested to hear your Paramecia related ideas. But we also need to ask the very necessary question of, is Dragon even a fruit user to begin with? A lot of this video has taken many assumptions as something of a fact, and that, well, that can be a very dangerous thing, because here's the deal. Yes, Dragon has been associated with grand wind phenomena on 2 separate occasions, but both of those cases could have been a different character, such as another member of the Revolutionary Army. We've never seen Dragon invoke this strange wind power, and in fact in its very first demonstration in the manga, Dragon actually looks like he's defending himself or bracing against the wind. And it's difficult to imagine him engaging in this act if he were, say, a wind Logia, because why would you bother? You are literally wind, so it's not going to affect you. And I'd also say something similar for a mythical Zoan, but it is very important to note that the anime not only admitted the line that accompanied this panel, but also the wind's effect on Dragon. We do not see his reaction to the wind, which could be an instance of Oda perhaps regretting depicting Dragon that way and fully forming the idea of his powers at a later date. Because here's something that not a lot of people want to admit, but One Piece is much less planned than you would think. It's really solidly done in general, but Oda does retroactively change earlier ideas after discovering better ones. So it's hard to know how much stock to place in a piece of art that was drawn 21 years ago at this stage. And if Dragon is a a Devil Fruit user, then maybe he wasn't intended to be at this point, and maybe he still isn't intended to be one. And of course, there are always going to exist some more left field explanations, like the idea that Dragon and the Revolutionary Army might have control of the ancient weapon Uranus, the most mysterious of the three to us at this point, but one that is heavily hinted to have a sky-based effect to match how Pluton devastates land and Poseidon controls the sea. And as such, Uranus could have a powerful wind-based effect that Dragon is able to harness, because who knows what form it takes. Not me, that's who. But my personal conclusion on the matter is less to do with these potential demonstrations of power, and more about how Dragon is depicted when at peace on Baltigo. The situations with Logtown and the Goa Kingdom are what people tend to fixate on, but there is just something so revealing about how Dragon is depicted in his downtime. Because even in the most subtle and arguably boring points of his life, wind is still a paramount feature. It surrounds Dragon in a very unique way, especially when you consider that wind is hailed as one of the most unpredictable and destructive forces within the Grand Line and the New World. Meanwhile, in regards to Dragon, wind is startlingly predictable, controllable, and even calm. So if I had to place a bet right now on if Dragon was a Devil Fruit user, then I would probably say yes. Just because with the old Occam's razor theory, it's the simplest explanation, regardless of whether it is a Wind Logia or a mythical Zoan. Every other explanation very much requires a further leap of logic, which is certainly not impossible to make by any means, but I do find it difficult to invest too much stock into those thoughts when there is a much easier alternative to latch onto. But even with that in mind, that is the beauty of One Piece, because those stranger left field ideas can more often than not become reality, and in fact ideas that absolutely no one predicted can take the stage, and as such all I can really do is look forward to the inevitable day that Dragon's powers are revealed.